Something feels really strange inside the NASCAR world right now, and honestly, I don't think many fans were prepared for this conversation at all. Because over the last couple of days, there's been this growing feeling around one of the biggest names in the sport that something just isn't right anymore. Not just on the track either. The energy feels different. The reactions feel different. Even longtime fans are starting to notice it. And the weird part is that this all comes at a moment when people expected things to finally calm down instead. What was just announced has completely flipped the mood. Round one of NASCAR's most recognizable drivers. And once you really look at the full picture here, it starts to feel way bigger than just another rough weekend, because this may not only affect the rest of the season, it could seriously change the way people look at his future moving forward. So yeah, we gotta talk about this now before we get into everything. If you're a real NASCAR fan who loves honest conversation about this sport and all the drama happening behind the scenes, go ahead and subscribe because this season has been absolute chaos already. And honestly, it feels like we're only getting started. So here's what has everybody talking right now. The announcement surrounding Kyle Busch hit fans a lot harder than people expected. And it's not necessarily because it came out of nowhere. In some ways, the warning signs have been sitting right in front of us for months. The frustrating finishes, the tension on the radio, the visible disappointment after races, the feeling that every single week somehow turns into another uphill battle. That's what makes this situation emotional for longtime fans, because we are talking about one of the most intense competitors NASCAR has seen in the modern era. A driver who built his entire reputation on confidence, aggression, and pure speed. Love him or hate him, Kyle Busch was always the guy who walked into a race weekend believing he could beat everybody. That confidence used to intimidate the garage. But lately, fans are starting to ask a question that honestly would have sounded ridiculous just a few years ago. What exactly is happening to Kyle Busch? And here's the thing that has fans scratching their heads. When Kyle made the move to Richard Childress Racing, there was real excitement around it. A fresh start, new leadership, a chance to reset everything after the emotional split with Joe Gibbs Racing, and early on, it actually looked promising. There were flashes of the old Kyle Busch again. Wins, confidence, aggression, momentum, but somehow, that momentum slowly disappeared. Now, every race weekend feels tense. You can almost hear the frustration building through the radio transmissions alone. Small mistakes turn into massive setbacks. Bad pit strategy becomes another lost opportunity. Mechanical problems show up at the worst possible times. And for a driver as emotional and demanding as Kyle Busch, that kind of constant disappointment starts adding up mentally. That is not just a bad stretch. That is a confidence drain, and the announcement this week only made those concerns louder. Because once fans heard the news, social media instantly exploded with reactions. Some fans were shocked, others were frustrated. And honestly, a lot of longtime NASCAR viewers sounded genuinely sad talking about it. Not because they dislike Kyle Busch, but because they remember what peak Kyle Busch looked like. They remember the dominance, they remember the swagger, they remember when he felt almost unbeatable. Now let's flip the page for a second, because this is where things start getting emotional. One thing people outside NASCAR sometimes forget is how brutal this sport can become mentally, especially for veteran drivers. Every single week is pressure from sponsors, pressure from teams, pressure from fans. And when results stop matching expectations, the criticism gets loud fast. For Kyle Busch, that pressure feels even heavier because of who he is. This is a two-time Cup Series champion, one of the winningest drivers of his generation, a guy who built a career off proving doubters wrong over and over again. So when things start slipping, fans notice immediately, the garage notices immediately, and drivers absolutely notice immediately. That changes everything psychologically. And honestly, some of Kyle's recent interviews have felt different too, less fiery, more exhausted, almost like somebody trying to stay positive while knowing things aren't heading in the direction they hoped. That's tough for fans to watch. especially the ones who grew up watching him dominate NASCAR for nearly 2 decades. But that's not even the craziest part, because now the bigger conversation has quietly started forming around the Gouge area. What happens next? Seriously, does Kyle Busch still have another major championship run left in him? Can Richard Childress Racing build around him strongly, enough to compete with teams like Hendrick Motorsports or Team Penske consistently? Or are we starting to witness the painful final phase that eventually comes for almost every NASCAR superstar? That's the uncomfortable question nobody really wants to say out loud. And the reason this latest announcement hits so hard is because it suddenly made those fears feel real. Now, to be clear, nobody is saying Kyle Busch is done writing off a driver with his talent is dangerous. We've seen veterans bounce back before in this sport. We've seen careers look finished before suddenly exploding back to life after one big moment. And honestly, Kyle Busch is exactly the type of driver stubborn enough to prove everybody wrong again. That's why fans are still emotionally invested, because deep down, a huge part of the NASCAR world still believes there's another iconic moment left in him somewhere. Maybe that happens this season. Maybe it happens next year. Or maybe this difficult stretch becomes one of the biggest turning points of his entire career. And there's even more pressure now because younger drivers are getting faster. Every season, the sport keeps evolving, aggression levels keep rising, technology keeps changing, which means veterans can't survive on reputation alone anymore. They have to adapt constantly. That's exhausting, especially when expectations never disappear. So now all eyes are going to be on Kyle Busch over these next few races. Fans are going to analyze every interview, every radio message, every reaction after pit road mistakes, every finish, because people are searching for signs right now. Signs that the old Kyle Busch is still there. Signs that this story still has another chapter left. And honestly, that's what makes this entire situation feel so emotional for NASCAR fans, whether people rooted for him or rooted against him over the years. Kyle Busch has always mattered. He changes the energy of the sport when he's competitive. NASCAR feels louder when Kyle Busch is in the middle of controversy, battling for wins, frustrating rivals, and making headlines. The sport genuinely feels different without that version of him. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Kyle Busch can still return to championship form? Or are we watching the beginning of the final chapter of one of NASCAR's biggest modern era careers? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because NASCAR fans are seriously divided on this one right now.